Delighted that there are so many students here. I know you have a tight window, but we're delighted that you're able to attend. Mike has been in this hall many, many a time, not dancing, but at Fela, but it's been transformed, and Peter gave me a tour of it recently. I couldn't believe how this hall has been transformed, and the rest of the facilities are pretty remarkable. I'm here just to welcome everybody and welcome Mike Nesbitt and Sara, who's going to chair and facilitate the event. Before we start, we're delighted to ask Peter, Principal of St Mary's College, who you know so well, who's hosting today, and has been a good friend of education in West Belfast and a good friend of peace and reconciliation for many decades. Peter.
So my welcome this morning is to, first of all, the students, very, very important in terms of the future of where we all live, and also the various others who have come here to listen to Mike this morning, who are not students, but are interested parties. So you're very, very welcome to St Mary's, and I hope you enjoy this morning. We're very pleased to welcome also the Hume Foundation for its annual lecture. The legacy of John and Pat Hume is enormous. I don't think as you get older, as I get older and you're so young, you probably don't really recall the overall contribution that those two people made to peace, reconciliation in our land, but it was immense. And the hard lifting, a lot of the hard lifting was done by John and Pat Hume. And it is fitting that this foundation reminds people of that, because it can be very easily forgotten about. The theme that's being developed by the foundation, and as part of this morning as well, is the theme of building common ground. And that's a really important theme, and it certainly absolutely epitomizes the two Humes. Just on a slightly personal note, I remember years ago leaving London Heathrow to come to Belfast, and the two of them came walking to me along the corridor, and I walked past them, and then I stopped and said, no, can't do that. And I turned around and I says, do you mind if I just shake your hand and thank you for everything you've done? And it wasn't much long after that John Hume died, and I'm delighted I did it. It's just one of those little things in life. And that's a message for all the students. Don't let moments go by, because later on there's nothing you can do about it. We have an excellent speaker this morning, someone who's been at St Mary's many times, speaking at Fela and Fubble, and a formal visit when you were the head of the Ulster Unionist Party. I jokingly said this morning that Mike walked past our boiler house, which provides all the heat in here, and he asked me what party we use. And we use those pellets. And the next day, the whole crisis emerged about the cash for ash. So I had to bury the whole story. But let me assure you, we made nothing out of it. We did just make that absolutely clear. So Mike's here today as the leader of the Ulster Unionist Party, but of course, in a critical way, which relates to every single one of us, he's the Minister for Health. And there's nothing more important than health. So that's excellent. On the matter of common ground, I'll just say this very, very quickly. Student teachers. At St Mary's, we seek to develop your value system. And it's a value system which has a religious dimension, because this is a faith-based institution, religious values. Faith is very important here. But we also try to develop values around the academic, total integrity all the time in terms of what you do. Or professional values. The key one there is trust. The trust that you are given with young people. And of course, the common values of the civic world in which we live. And these things come together. These values come together. It's not as if the religious values are totally unrelated to the values, for example, around the importance of your civic contribution. You can make an enormous contribution. When you become teachers, every word you say, every action you take, every aspect of your behaviour will be observed by young people. And if it's positive, that'll lead to positivity. And that's what we're trying to do here. On the matter of personal common ground, Mike Nesbitt doesn't know this until now. But Mike Nesbitt has a background as a middle distance runner. And Mike Nesbitt was a very good middle distance runner, because he won the Irish schools. And it's all right winning Gaelic games and rugby and soccer, but they're for sort of half the schools or a quarter of the schools. In track and field athletics, it's all the schools in Ireland. And Mike Nesbitt was a really top-class young man. 1,500 metres, I believe, was the distance, Irish schools. What he doesn't know is that the head of St Mary's also won the Irish schools. A little bit earlier than him, not very long, but my distance was 400 metres. So I'd be quite happy to take Mike on in anything up to about 800. Beyond that, he would destroy me. So there we go. That's a piece of common ground that he was totally unaware of. So athlete to athlete, so to speak. That'll be the common ground. We're not big on formalities here, but I think Sarah's going to come forward now, who's the chairperson of the Hume Foundation. Just a board member, and you're going to introduce this wonderful athlete.
Well, I thought I knew a lot about Mike Nesbitt. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of an overview just of the foundation, our message, and the man himself. So the John and Pat Hume Foundation for Peaceful Change and Reconciliation launched in November 2020, and it was to commemorate the message and the contributions of John and Pat Hume, and to further the Hume principles of inclusion, peacemaking, civil rights, social justice, and partnership. Partnership is probably one of the most important elements of this, because together is really the only way forward, and to work well together we have to find our commonality. This series of events falls under the umbrella of building common ground, because doing so is vital. It's vital to the success of any process of peace and reconciliation. And I'm glad to see so many of you here today. As young teachers, you're going to be doing the work. You're laying the groundwork with our young generations, and it's amazing that you're here to hear this, and hopefully you take on board what Mike has to say. So our guest speaker at this event is no newcomer to said work. I'm delighted to welcome Mike Nesbitt as today's keynote speaker. Mike has been leader of the Ulster Unionist Party since 2024 and had an earlier stint. He's the current Health Minister for Northern Ireland, and he has served the Strangford constituency as an MLA since 2011. Previous to that, he was Commissioner for Victims and Survivors, so quite a well-rounded background. Now, before his impressive political career, Mike was probably Northern Ireland's most recognisable newscaster. He was the face of UTV Live for much of the 90s and noughties, and your mammies, or possibly looking at the age of everyone here, your grannies, might have had a bit of a soft spot for him. His main competition in this was Frank Mitchell, so as you can see, it was a close run thing. But if you preferred the news, you might have been a bit more of a Mike fan. Unlike myself, Mike is no stranger to public speaking, so without further ado, I'm delighted to welcome Mike Nesbitt.
Thank you both very much indeed, and good morning, good morning, good morning. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share a few thoughts with you this morning. I suppose the first issue to address is, why is a leader of the Ulster Unionist Party standing on the Falls Road as a trustee of the John and Pat Hume Foundation? It is not, shall we say, the norm, but it's certainly not abnormal for me to be here at St Mary's. As has been said, I'm a frequent visitor to Fela and Fubble. In fact, there was a period when I was here so often I was disappointed I didn't have a proper metal name badge. And I've also been a guest on other occasions of your principal. So that leaves the Hume bit. Now, as I grew up in this city, born in 1957, so I grew up just in time to live through what we so euphemistically call the Troubles. And I couldn't tell you the number of times as a broadcast journalist when I was interviewing a politician whose narrative was, "Oh, woe is me, we're a terribly divided society, and it's all them's fault." And the one exception was John Hume, because he swapped the negativity of division for the positivity of diversity. And to quote from his Nobel lecture when he and David Trimble got the Nobel Prize for Peace in '98, John said, "Difference is an accident of birth, and it should never be the source of hatred or conflict. The answer to difference is to respect it, and therein lies a most fundamental principle of peace, respect for diversity." Now, 4 years later, in 2002, he said this: "Our societies are also more diverse than ever before, ethnically, culturally, religiously, and also in terms of lifestyle. Once again, probably ahead of his time. And then he went on to say this: if we want to avoid barbarism, we must recognize, accept, and celebrate the fact of human diversity. We are all different. We all have multiple economic, social, cultural, and political identities. Some of these identities coincide, others are cross-cutting, even within individuals. So I think if you were here today, John Hume would say there's nothing to be surprised about that an Ulster Unionist leader is on the Falls Road in West Belfast, speaking as a trustee of the Hume Foundation. The positivity of the diversity message, for me, can be summed up in one word, and that word is hope. So I'm going to talk personally about hope through 3 examples. 2 days in my little life when hope peaked, one for me, one for everybody. But first of all, one when it slumped. It was a horrible day for me, the 25th of January, 1973. It was the day the IRA blew up Alfred Nesbitt and Company Limited. Alfred was my grandfather. The business was a linen manufacturer's. And the business had been passed from Grandad to my father and my uncle. And it was expected I would grow up to become the 3rd generation to run that business. Now, Dad was 49 years of age on that day, and in the moment of the explosion, every certainty in his life disappeared because he'd been brought up to be 2nd generation runner. But every responsibility remained. He still had a wife, he still had 3 young children, he still had a car and a house to maintain, but suddenly no regular income. And as it turned out, there was no way to get the business up and running again. So it was a day when certainties and hope just disappeared. So a couple of years later, I was studying English literature at university, and I came across a passage in Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. And this is what he wrote: "That was a memorable day to me, for it made great changes in me. But it's the same with any life. Imagine one selected day struck out of it, and think how different its course would have been. Pause, you who read this, and think for a moment of the long chain of iron or gold, of thorns or flowers, that would never have bound you, but for the formation of the first link on one memorable day." You know, I think that is the story of our troubles. Thousands upon thousands of our fellow citizens who got wrapped in chains of thorns because of a memorable day when they got caught up in our conflict, when they got injured, when they saw loved ones being killed, when they had their livelihoods taken away from them on memorable days. And I'm wondering, of the students, have you had your memorable day yet? The day that's going to change your life, that's going to shape your future? Mine came around the same time as that bomb. I've got to tell you, this is my confession. I went from primary school to big school with a reputation, to use the language of the day, of being a dunce. So in any given academic test, you could bet I was going to finish 23rd out of a class of 24. I couldn't sing, I couldn't play a musical instrument, I didn't have the talent to make any of the sports teams. And I also couldn't swim, which was a big issue because every week we went swimming. And if you could swim, you were allowed to wear your own trunks. But if you couldn't, the school made you, for some sort of health and safety reason, wear what was effectively a big red, one-piece, Borat-style mankini. It was the ultimate humiliation. Teachers had given up on me. My peers had given up on me. I think my parents were probably just too polite to say they had given up on me as well. And then it all changed. One wet Wednesday in winter, it rained so hard that all the playing fields were flooded. So the teachers sent us on a run around the pavements to the perimeter of the school. And who knew? I could run. So, of course, one teacher did the obvious thing, signed me up for the athletics team. But another great teacher sat me down and said, "Son, if you can do that well out there, isn't there a classroom in here where you might do better than 23rd out of 24th?" It was the first time any adult, any person of authority gave me to believe or question, is my natural place in life 23rd out of 24th? Maybe it isn't. He gave me hope. And I don't mean this boastfully, but 5 years after arriving, 23rd out of 24th, I left with an Irish Schools athletics vest in one hand and an invitation to study at Cambridge University in the other. That was hope. The other memorable day takes me into politics. And I first got interested in politics, I suppose, because of the bomb. I didn't understand why we were doing what we were doing to each other. And looking at my dad, I wanted to know more about the human cost of conflict. So I ended up as a broadcast journalist. I covered the conflict, also the peace talks that culminated in the 1998 agreement on the 10th of April that year. First point is those talks were supposed to end the previous day, on Thursday, the 9th of April. Senator George Mitchell, who chaired the talks, wanted to get back to the United States. So as the clock ticked through midnight into Good Friday, I sensed this was going to be a very momentous day. Either I would be reporting on an historic deal or on the end of 700 days of talks and negotiations ending in a monumental failure. So at around 2 o'clock that morning, I drove home from the talks. I wanted to have a shower, shave, get changed, freshen up for this extra time. And as I stuck my head around the bedroom door, I was overcome with this huge wave of emotion. Because there in bed were my two sons, who were aged 3 and 10 months, sleeping really peacefully with their mum. And the thought was, if this works today, they're going to grow up in the same city as me, city I love, but in a totally different atmosphere. No threat of bombs, no threat of gunfire, no threat of the authorities kicking in your back door. No days when your mum's going to say, you can't go into town after all, because your dad says it's far too dangerous. And no waking up to put on the radio to hear about the latest atrocity. It was a great day of hope. And believe it or not, one of the measures I thought about that day was about the transformation of this city. And I said this at a failure one time, that one measure to me would be when my boys grew up, they might say to me, Dad, there's a new bar or a new restaurant on the Falls Road, do you fancy trying it out on Friday? Now, I'm not sure we've got there yet, but when I mentioned it at Failure, 2 women came up to me afterwards, and they're from here. And they said, it is starting to happen, you know, because of the glider. They said, every now and then, we get the glider across to Ballyhackamore in East Belfast. We get off the bus, we'll have a cup of coffee, and we get the glider back home. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that common ground? It makes my heart sing. Well, the moment back on Good Friday, when I saw my family in bed, is the moment I think I stopped being a journalist and became a citizen of this place. A citizen who wants better for all our young people. For you, I want everybody to have a memorable day that wraps you in a chain of gold and of roses. And I call it a prosperity agenda. And prosperity isn't just about money, but being financially secure is, of course, important. Having a few quid in your back pocket can be very liberating come the weekend. But it's more about what the Americans so wisely referred to in the 1776 Declaration of Independence, when they wrote, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among those rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, for me, there are 5 elements to that statement. There's equality, there's rights generally, the specific right to life, the specific right to liberty, and the right to do what you need to do to be happy. In other words, creating the circumstances where you, as an individual, can wake up feeling life is good. So you can get out of bed with a sense of purpose because you have things to do that you want to do. And I stress that phrase, things you do that you want to do. And when you go to bed, you have a sense of satisfaction or maybe frustration, which is your motivator to get up and go again tomorrow. That's not to say there are no obstacles in your way, but it is to say that the hurdles you have to clear are no higher or more difficult than the next person. It means you feel cherished, that your family, your community, and your government wants you to succeed, and that's not always something that happens. And not just here, but anywhere. Look at how divisive American politics has become, or British politics, given the recent local government and the other results. I think it would be quite a challenge to have to sit down with Donald Trump or Nigel Farage and try and find some common ground. And you know, when I was growing up, international politicians always encouraged our leaders to share space, sit down with one another, find that common ground. And yet 2 years ago in 2023, I was in the United States for the 25th anniversary of the agreement. One event was a debate by the National Committee on American Foreign Policy. And the NCAFP was the body that got Gerry Adams out to America for the first time in 1994. That was the time President Clinton controversially gave Gerry Adams his first visa to visit the USA. It was a visa limited by time and geography, 48 hours in New York, so he could attend the conference. So controversial was this decision that Prime Minister John Major refused to take a call from President Clinton for 2 days. And the conference was supposed to hear from the leaders of the 5 main local parties: Jim Molyneux of the Ulster Unionists, Ian Paisley, DUP, John Hume, John Alderdice was leader of the Alliance Party, and Gerry Adams as president of Sinn Féin. But when Adams got the visa, the 2 unionist leaders withdrew from the conference, but more than that, they cancelled their flights. Now, I went out and covered it for Ulster Television, and the mood in America was very clear. Unionists had committed a massive act of self-harm. Who walks off the pitch and leaves the ball clear for their opponents to have a free kick? So for me, debating at the NCAFP was kind of closing a circle, because I sat with Mary Lou MacDonald, Colm Eastwood, Naomi Long and others. And yeah, there were moments of disagreement, tension even, if you prefer. But the Americans were amazed that we even agreed to sit and share that space. They said there was no way they could get their politicians to do it. And you know, if you're only prepared to enter a room full of people who think the same way you do, we're not going to make a lot of progress. I need to be able to walk into a room and say, look, I'm a unionist, here's what I think, and most importantly, here's why I think that way. And if you can't do that, you've got a problem. That, by the way, is why I think Sinn Féin were wrong not to go to Washington this March. I know Donald Trump said he was unaware of the boycott, but I can tell you, I spoke to Republican representatives who were angry about it. One said to me, after all the fundraising we've done for them, after all the influence we have given them in this town, and they do that to us? And I do wonder what happens next year. Can nationalists and Republicans go back? Because, you know, St. Patrick's Day in Washington a long time ago became St. Patrick's Week. Some say it's St. Patrick's season. And if you look at other nations like France, Italy, Germany, other European nations who have huge ethnic blocs all around the United States, they look so enviously at us. And they say, why on earth do the Irish get that amount of influence and access to the White House and Capitol Hill? And if we ever lose it, we will never get it back. And this is the time to make the most of our connections, of the impact of the 2 great waves of emigration from here, the Ulster Scots in the 1600s and the Irish Americans a couple of hundred years later. Because next year, 2026, is the 250th anniversary of American independence. And you know, 3 people from Ulster were among the 52 who signed it. One from Strabane printed it, another designed the Great Seal. People from these shores have produced American presidents, industrialists, creative soldiers, you name it. Our impact on how the United States developed is unmatched internationally, and next year is an unprecedented opportunity to celebrate that fact. And you know, I find it extraordinary, by the way, that people resent and resist immigrants coming here to make a home, when so many of our forebears did exactly that around the world, not least in the United States. But our history, of course, is not always a happy or glorious one. And I'm going to finish with 2 thoughts, one about the past and one about the future. In terms of the past, I think I can do no better than quoting another Nobel laureate, David Trimble. In his lecture, he said this: Ulster Unionists fearful of being isolated on the island, built a solid house. But it was a cold house for Catholics. And Northern nationalists, although they had a roof over their head, seemed to us as if they meant to burn the house down. Now, I can understand how creating a country with a built-in majority of unionists was deeply, deeply frustrating to nationalists. You could have a storming election every month. We were always going to win. And the fact is, nationalists, by and large, decided they're not going to play that game. And I think, by and large, unionists could have done a lot more to reach out to their nationalist neighbours. That doesn't justify a single death, by the way. Nobody needed to die to get where we are today. But the fact is, we had to recognise that majoritarianism does not work here. Consociational government, or power sharing, is the only way. And unionists, or at least most of us, realise we cannot govern this place without the active support of nationalists and Republicans. And nationalists and Republicans, or most of them, realise they can no longer describe this place as a failed, ungovernable statelet. And for me, that's the hope for the future, because for the first time, everybody, unionists, nationalists, Republicans, sense the need to make Northern Ireland work. Our motivations, of course, are different, but that's no obstacle to make this place function for the benefit of everyone. Unionists, of course, have always wanted to make Northern Ireland work. In other words, to justify partition. Nationalists, of course, haven't. But when was the last time you heard a senior nationalist politician describe this place as a failed, ungovernable statelet? If you're the lead party of government, it's not a sentiment you're likely to endorse, especially if you're looking forward to a border poll and the potential for constitutional change. Because if you're voting in Dublin, or Galway, or Wexford, or Limerick, what's attractive about voting to adopt a failed, ungovernable statelet of 1.9 million people, people you don't know and probably don't feel that fond about, and who will require thousands of your tax euro to survive? Now, David Trimble's Nobel lecture also included this statement with regard to hope. He said, there are hills in Northern Ireland and there are mountains. The hills are decommissioning and policing, but the mountain, if we could but see it clearly, is not in front of us, but behind us. The dark shadow we seem to see in the distance is not really a mountain ahead, but the shadow of a mountain behind. A shadow from the past thrown forward into our future. It is a dark sludge of historical sectarianism. We can leave it behind us if we wish. Well, I know I'm nearer the end of my political career than the beginning, and I want to dedicate my remaining time to delivering that prosperity agenda for all our citizens. And the decision on our constitutional future doesn't belong to me, might fall to my children, maybe even to their children. But my children, now aged 30 and 27, the ones I got so emotional about the day of the agreement, now live in Birmingham and in Bath. And they left not because they particularly wanted to, but because they felt they had to for opportunities. So my measure of success will be creating the circumstances where young people only leave this place because they want to leave, not because they feel that they have to. And my final thought is this. I'm tired of hearing people talk about the potential of this place. I want to turn that potential into reality. For you students, for your peers, and for everybody. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm sure, like myself, that gave everybody a lot to think about. Sorry. It's always interesting to hear something from a point of view that maybe you hadn't considered before, or maybe you haven't heard, especially when you get some insight into one of our political leaders, which I think is always more humanising. I know a lot of you are probably like myself, grew up, you see these people on TV, and you don't look at them as normal human beings, but they are. It's kind of weird when you start meeting them, trust me. I've found that they're less like an authority figure and more of just some dude that works for us, which is one of the things that I like to hammer home to people, that politicians do work for us. They don't work. We don't work for them, and they need to work for our approval. So on that we note, Mike, we're going to have a bit of a question and answer session, and I was wondering if anybody had any questions to open up. This lady here.
Well, my only objection to the Irish language at Central Station was that it should have been done at the time it was being built. So you've got all this additional signage, was brand new, and the estimate is like it's £140,000 to put in the new signage that is in Irish language. You know, that's a lot of hip replacements. And, you know, I'm sitting with a big budget of health, but it's about £500 million short of what my finance people say I need to keep the service running. So my only objection to that is, was the process done properly, and you know, why wasn't it done when the station was being built? More generally, I don't have a difficulty with the Irish language. I don't speak it. I have no particular desire to learn it. I don't particular desire at my age to learn any other language. But I think we have all politically made a mess of the Irish language. And the one thing that I did say is that historically, one party is on record as saying every word spoken in Irish is a bullet fired for Irish freedom. That needs to be addressed. That needs to be put to bed, because I don't think that is the way the majority of Irish language speakers or people who want to learn Irish think about it. But it's there, and it needs to be addressed. And I don't think it's a particularly difficult thing to address, to just say that was wrong and it's not how we feel.
Yeah, this gentleman here in orange.
Well, I think first of all, to have a 4 or 5 party coalition government is really difficult, because you're trying to work collegiately, and yet you're working with other parties. So, you know, even a single party, like the Labour Party in London, is not particularly united in terms of supporting its leader, Keir Starmer, and the rest. So it's a big challenge, and I think the deal that was done in 1998 was not about effective government. It was just about getting everybody into the tent. So we're still learning. I have to say, having gone into the executive for the first time just about, last June, I think, was my first meeting, I sensed that there was a bit of collegiate atmosphere about it. I would give great credit to Michelle O'Neill as First Minister, because I think she's really genuine about that. And I go back to the fact everybody now wants to make Northern Ireland work, no matter what their motivation is. I also think that we are developing a more mature sense of the fact that I don't think anything we want to change can be achieved by a single minister or a single department. So, for example, one of my passions as Health Minister is to tackle health inequalities. And I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but one measure of health inequalities is two girls could be born across the road in the Royal today. They could grow up in this city, live maybe no more than a mile apart, but one in the area of the worst deprivation and one in an area of the least deprivation or the most affluent area. And their healthy life expectancy will vary by 14.1 years. It's 2025. We're a quarter of the way into the 21st century. We're a first world country. And yet we will tolerate somebody growing up in an area of deprivation, having a healthy lifespan that ends 14 years earlier than somebody living somewhere like the Malone Road. But to tackle that, there's international research that says it's only 20% health interventions that will cure that. It's 40% socio-economic, it's 10% environment, and it's 30% behaviours like smoking, drinking. So things like the tobacco and vape spill coming out of London will be really useful. So I've mentioned that to executive colleagues in terms of saying, I'm going to start doing the 20%, but I would expect you, Minister for the Economy, Minister for Agriculture and the Environment, to come on board and do your bit. And I was getting a positive response to that. Now, obviously, we haven't got to the actions yet. I have to demonstrate that I'm delivering in terms of what I'm calling my Live Better initiative in health, which is here on the Falls Road and the Shankill and the Grosvenor Road, and also up in Derry/Londonderry. So I'm a bit more optimistic than you. I do understand in the court of public opinion we're about as low as you can get. I mean, journalists were pretty low, and then I changed to a profession which is even lower. I kind of think I've bottomed out. And I do think we've got about 12 months to start delivering. And I mean, your point is well made. The number of things that have been around for years. I mean, Ben Goa was here, in 2016? And I brought him back last year because people had either never read the report or had lost sight of what was in it and what wasn't in it to try and reboot it. And it is really slow. So when the new Perm Sec came into health a few weeks ago, Mike Farrar, he said, what do you expect of me? And I said, I'll tell you in one word, Mike, urgency. I want urgency. And I'm not sensing it in the department. And I think we need an awful lot more urgency right across government. Because money's tight for everybody, sure. But you can't let that be an excuse. You know, and in my ministerial office, I've got a little quote on the shelf from it's a Russian guy, Ivan Turganov, and it says, if we wait for the moment when everything, absolutely everything is ready, we shall never begin. And I think down the years we have been waiting for everything to be ready. Well, first of all, we're not closing any hospitals. Well, because we have really grossly overcomplicated healthcare delivery. So I can't make a decision about a hospital because a hospital is run by a trust and it's an arm's length body, it's an independent body. So, for example, the Causeway up in Coleraine is under the Northern Trust, and they are trying to separate out emergency surgery from elective or planned surgery up in the Causeway, which is a really good idea because you might have been on a waiting list for a planned procedure for 4 years, and you wake up this morning knowing, right, I'm going to the Causeway Hospital, I'm going to get my knee done or whatever it is, but there's been a multiple car crash, a couple of people have been killed, a lot of people are seriously injured. You'll get a phone call from the hospital to say, I'm very sorry, the theatre's in use for an emergency. So you're better having one hospital doing just emergencies and another hospital just doing elective or planned care. But I can only sign off when the trusts say this is what we're going to do, and they have to go out and consult. It's just really complicated, and it shouldn't be that way. For example, we've got 5 geographic health trusts. The 6 counties of Northern Ireland is geographically pretty small. We've got less than 2 million of a population. Why do we need 5 trusts? Why not have one? And I thought about that when I took up post, but actually if I said I want one trust, everybody would kind of drop everything to make it happen. So it would become a distraction, and actually service delivery would slow down and it would actually get worse. So all I've done is I've brought in the chairs and the chief execs, and I've said, in my mind, you're one trust. Stop competing, start collaborating, start cooperating. I know I haven't answered your question. You still think we're all crap? Well, yeah. Well, what I can do is set policy. And so what I've said is I want to do what is commonly called shift left. So at the moment, all the emphasis is on hospitals and waiting lists. In other words, curing the sick. What about keeping healthy people healthy? So that's about trying to get healthcare as close to the front door as possible. It's about putting more money and resource into primary care, which means GP surgeries, pharmacies. Pharmacies can do a lot more in terms of keeping people healthy or early interventions. So that's the policy that I'm setting, but in terms of actually delivering it, I'm relying on the trusts, I'm relying on the GPs. But I tell you, if you look at the map of who all is involved in delivering healthcare, it is incredibly complicated. There's so many bodies, so many Royal Colleges, British Medical Association, trusts. It really is far too complicated.
Can you say something? I think we have to remember where we're thinking overnight. Chinese British government can't do it. Democracy closes them down. So you have to be careful. On the one hand, you've got democratic organisations, on the other hand, you've got totalitarian states voice. Totalitarian state, no say, or democratic state, have a say, but that's
Yeah. I suppose the other thing is, if I go into the Assembly chamber in Stormont and say we need to reform how we deliver healthcare, the other 89 will all go, yeah. But then if I say, and the first step is going to be we're taking emergency surgery away from Causeway and moving it to Antrim, the 5 MLAs who represent East Londonderry are all on their feet crying, no, shame, protest. They're joining the crowds with the placards outside the Causeway Hospital saying, save our services. So there's that kind of NIMBYism that is a big obstacle.
Okay, anybody else? Just this gentleman here.
You may help with my accent. American. Quite clear. Right. Parents, everybody was free at the point of access. But as time went on, it seemed to me that what we had was a culture of this culture or politics of austerity. And that seemed to be a very powerful ideology. We said we were broke. Do you think we really are broke? Or do you think there are ways to get the kind of funding we had during the Troubles back?
Well, we're clearly not broke, but I don't think we're funded as we should be. And to get the Assembly back after the last hiatus, we had those negotiations with the British government, and we successfully made a point about the block grant that we get, which was based on a Barnett formula, which is a very crude system that looks at head count. And we said, look, you shouldn't be giving us money based on our head count, you should be giving us money based on our needs. And therefore we got from getting £1 for every pound that was being spent by the government in England to the point where for every pound being spent in England we would be given £1.24. Now some of us would argue it should actually be £1.27, maybe even £1.28. But that was the big change that has come about. The argument we had with the government was, now that you've accepted it should be £1.24, you should back pay us for the years when it was only £1. And we haven't won that particular argument. I think we can be more productive and more efficient, not just in health, but I have to say no amount of productivity or efficiency is going to close the gap in terms of the health budget. So one thing that I think MLAs by and large don't understand, and I didn't understand until I went into the department, is just what our needs are in terms of running an efficient and productive healthcare system. Because the population is growing, it is getting older, so people are presenting more often and with multiple morbidities. So it's much more complex in terms of, and we're keeping people alive. There are people now going for like their 7th or 8th round of cancer treatment. A few years ago, they wouldn't be presenting because they would be dead. So it does become a victim of its own success, as it were. The one thing I think that we really need to concentrate on is sharing budgets, because as I said earlier, there's very little that can be achieved by one minister or one department. So, I look at, and I talked about health inequalities involving other ministers, but I also look at, for example, economic inactivity. 26% of people of working age are neither in work nor seeking work. And if you start analysing why is that, there are a lot of factors. Some people are students taking second degrees, that's a good thing. Some people are retiring early because they've got their money made, that's fine too. But the single biggest obstacle to people being economically active is poor health. So I've got a role to play. I can't just say to the economy minister, that's your problem, Kiva, you go and sort it out. Equally, when we look at educational underachievement at school, logically, healthier children do better at school. So I can't just look at Paul Given and say, that's your problem, pal. I have to contribute to that. And it's how you do that in a way where you can share your budgets and make the most of the money that is a challenge that we have not yet met.
Anyone else? This gentleman up here.
Oh,
There's a mic coming.
Thanks, Ruben. Sorry. In 2018, during debate here in the college, as part of the West Belfast Festival, you said unionism needs to wake up over the prospect of a united Ireland and challenged nationalist and Republican leaders to tell unionists that they wanted a united Ireland. So my question to you is, do you think that you will see a united Ireland in your lifetime? And how should the debate about political change on the island be conducted?
I'm absolutely not sure, but I don't think I'll see a united Ireland in my lifetime. I'm just about to turn 68. Don't know how long we've got left, but I would imagine it'll be that long. Yeah, well then I'm gone. I'm screwed. So really my remarks were kind of prompted by the thought of when I was growing up, the great Republican cry was Brits out. And I'm a Brit. I'm also Irish and European, but it was prompted by that kind of how come Brits out has become Brits in. So I think what I said was I have heard people, including Mary Lou MacDonald, saying, in a united Ireland, we need to protect the rights of the unionist population. But I'd never heard a Republican say, we want you as part of this new dispensation, and here's why. Which is actually a criticism I would have of unionism at the time of partition, because I don't believe my forebearers turned to nationalists and Republicans and said, we want you as part of this new Northern Ireland state, and here is why. So that was the motivation for that. In terms of the debate, as I say, I don't think a unionist should be afraid of walking into a room full of nationalists and Republicans and stating their point of view. But I wouldn't expect nationalists or Republicans to join me in a debate about why Northern Ireland should remain part of the United Kingdom, any more than I think nationalists and Republicans should expect me to engage in a debate about the benefits of a united Ireland. I was in Dublin around that time, and I was speaking to a couple of elected representatives there. And I said, if there was a united Ireland, is it not a case of careful what you wish for? Because unionists could be the perpetual kingmakers in Dáil Éireann. And one of them said, well, what are you talking about? There won't be any unionists anymore. Sure, the union will have gone. And I said, well, yeah, we might have to rename ourselves, but we will still represent around 1 million people on the island of Ireland. And given every government, every election in the Republic leads to a coalition government, we could be right in the middle. We could be deciding who's going to be your next Taoiseach. And they'd never thought of that. So, I mean, there is an awful lot, I think, to be thought through. But the debate, if you want constitutional change, has to be led by yourselves. You can't expect me to lead that any more than I could expect Michelle to lead the debate about staying as part of the UK.
Any other questions? This lady here.
My observation is, I don't really think I need this, but anyway, my observation is that you're quite right, that the Irish language is politicised, very much so, alongside religion and other cultural traditions, all used as a badge of identity and misused in Northern Ireland. But look at the 6,000 children in the Irish medium system, and there you have evidence of the presence and of the future of the Irish language. And you will find not one of those children are concerned about political links with the Irish language. They're concerned about the way that they use the language to live their little lives. And that's what their parents are concerned about, how to get them to have a successful life, to have a healthy life. All of these values that are important. So that's done by other people, but this is what the emerging generation is, and it is happening within the unionist community as well, within the beginnings of Irish medium education now. A graduate from this college, now the first teacher in an Irish medium school in the unionist community in Belfast. And I take your point. It's everybody's right to say, you know, I'm not interested in the Irish language and I wish you well with it. But I think in a position of responsibility and leadership, that's an unfortunate statement to make, because you're in a position of influence and people will listen to you, will take a lead from that, and it's not a good one. So I'd encourage you to sort of push the boat out a little towards enthusiasm and positivity, and just to show at least that you appreciate the value of the Irish language in that sense, and not to let those people who will politicise the language win in that way. So that's my observation. My question, entirely different, is about relating to your emphasis in your talk on togetherness and collaboration, and I'm wondering within the government if you think enough has been done for departments to work together, and most particularly, and in a way that will interest a lot of people here, will be health and education. There is a huge emphasis and a big priority now on children with additional needs. They are recognised more than what they were before, and some more work is being done to produce strategies to improve that. But it really requires closer, meaningful collaboration between health and education. And you know, what's your thoughts on how that collaboration is going?
Well, yesterday I started the day in Lisburn at Parkview Special School, where there are children with really severe learning and physical challenges. And I've been going around some special schools because one of the things that I discovered which really shocked me was we as a department were taking community children or children's community nurses, CCNs, away from these special schools. And when I asked why, I was told, well, there's no career progression to it. But then the principals of these schools were coming to me and saying, look, these children have really severe health needs. Like they've got the peg tubes that need to be cleaned and they're fed through the tubes. All sorts of physical issues. And they're saying, you know, the classroom assistants are not there to be clinicians. They're not there as healthcare workers. So the first thing I did was I said, well, just stop that whole program. Don't remove any more CCNs. And I've gone around to the chief nursing officer. I think we've visited 4 special schools just to get our own sense. Because you really need to see it and feel it to understand it. And some of those children, oh God, they are really, you know, they need an awful lot of help. Like at Parkview, very violent. I mean, the teachers are showing me, they were wearing gloves, but they took the gloves off so you could see the scratch marks. and then the bite marks on the arms and having to go for tetanus jabs because they've been bitten. So I am trying to work really collaboratively with the Department of Education over children with special needs. And at the end of this month, or is it June? No, end of this month, we'll have a report on the needs right across special schools. And then we'll put in place a strategy and we'll start putting more resource back into it, because these are health issues and I have to accept that. Even though my budget is stretched, I can't be asking the Department of Education to pay for things which are health issues.
Okay, so we're at the presser time here now, so I'd just like to say thank you very much for everybody's questions. We covered quite a wide range of topics, which was fantastic, and I'm sure Mike has had his grey matter challenge somewhat today. And I'm really pleased that so many of you turned up. Thank you so much, and I hope that you all take something away from this today, and that you go back to class and have something to think about. Thank you so much.